Hey, it's Jose Galison. This is No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel. Also on all the major audio podcatchers. I'm Odyssey as well. Today, my guest is Jason Stapleton. We're not going to be doing any specific topic. Obviously, we'll be covering wealth, power, influence, that kind of stuff, but not really a topic focused episode today. We'll be hitting a lot of stuff. This right now, if you are a patron of mine, and this is the 2nd of December. This is a live stream for you. If not, this is being released about a week or so later. So if you'd like to not be the case, become a patron at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. It's $2 a month for the lowest level, just to get the streams, to get access to the episodes in the in-between time. I have the different levels. You have $5 for chat preference, 10% allow you to curate an episode, or $10 allows you to curate an episode. $20 the sponsor level, where I'll read off my sponsors every month. So my sponsors are CD McRae of the Whiskey and Tea podcast, Jermaine Vincent, Adam, and then at Big Boghorn of the No Time to Explain podcast, and my new sponsor at SpaceCat2K, which we'll be probably doing an episode here soon. He wants to cover I don't really necessarily see it as a conflict, but he did kind of present it as agorism versus a secession, but I'm not going to release too much info, go too deep into that to spoil the episode. But yeah, as always, go check out TopLobsta at toplobsta.com. Use Jose at checkout. He does all my art for like Tower Power Hour and a lot of other stuff I'm on. Yeah, let's get into it. We got a lot to cover, and I don't want to fiddle around with the time. I'm looking forward to this. What's up, Jason?
Hey, man, how are you? Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming on. You want to go ahead and intro yourself to the audience real quick for those who don't know you?
Yeah, I'm Jason Stapleton. I have a podcast called Wealth, Power, and Influence. We're about to change it back. Originally, it's called the Jason Stapleton Program. We're gonna be making that switch after the first of the year and going back to that title because I think it better illustrates kind of what the show is going to be about moving forward. But yeah, I have a business where I help entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs kind of find that little vein that helps them create a side business and how you turn that side business into a full-time business, and kind of try and help people as best I can make money doing what they love to do. So that's what I do.
Yeah. My buddy James Gentleman, he's one of your clients. He speaks highly of you. So I do suggest anyone who's looking into that, definitely do that. Yeah, it's definitely something that interests me. I mean, I'm not looking to go down that route right yet, but for those who are, it's definitely a great avenue for sure.
Well, you're going down it right now. You got this podcast. This podcast is a great way to start. Yeah, it's one. Yeah, I built the back of my business off the podcast. So
yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken off more than I thought. But at the same time, on the other hand, it is funny when people give you like accusations of only doing this for money or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like for me to invest a year of time into making, I don't know, what, a couple $100 at this point a month. Like, I mean, like it's something, but it's also it's not the greatest investment. I guess maybe it's a little bit lower time preference, I guess is how you could put it. But I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I mean, who knows? Maybe one day this will take off and I'll end up living off this. I mean, either way, I'm having fun. I like a little bit extra money on the side. I'm more of a jack of all trades. I like to have multiple things going on at once, because you never know what'll pay off. So,
yeah.
I did think it was kind of funny. I did want to start this episode off with, and don't take this at all as me being salty. Anyone who knows me knows I block like crazy. And I think there was some thread, someone, I'm not trying to dig in this at all. It was somebody was roasting you for somebody with their family stuff. I don't even care. I don't know all the stuff. For me, that's not really even something I really want to dig into. It just sounds like petty nonsense to me for anyone even to dig into that. But I posted some sort of like shocked reaction meme, and I can totally see how you would see that as like me essentially endorsing it. If anything, it was more just like for me, it was more like a holy shit type thing. But the whole point I'm getting at is that you immediately block like that, and I actually think you did the right thing, because I think to some extent you kind of got to separate the wheat from the chaff, and sometimes mistakes are made. And I did think it would be interesting to kind of apply that to real world, to not just to talk about Twitter world, but I do think that is actually a good way to go about life, is to essentially people that you in any way, shape, or form see as being a negative influence, don't hang around that. And I know you kind of talked on that on my buddy James podcast. And I think you had a lot to say on that, and I found it interesting, and I think it's totally true. But you also did say how you're an introvert. I'm an introvert. I know I'm not someone who necessarily needs friends, so I guess it's easy for me to be like, well, fine, fuck you. Like I don't need you in my life. That's kind of how I am. So I don't know if you have anything to say on that, because I know you had a good little riff on James' episode about that, and I thought it was interesting.
Oh, I don't know. I think that there are two kinds of people in this world who will tend to drag you down, and the first kind are the naysayers, and those are typically the tough ones because those are your family and your friends, and those are the people who genuinely care about you and they want to protect you, and they see that you're doing something that's out of the ordinary and maybe off the beaten path. Especially anytime you become really fanatical about anything, weightlifting or politics or entrepreneurship or anything like that. You're going to have people in your life who love you and who just don't want to see you get hurt. And those kind of people, you just have to kind of, those are parents, those are sometimes spouses, brothers and sisters and friends. And you have to do your very best just to recognize that they're doing that out of love and they don't really understand, and they think they're acting in your best interest, even though they're probably not. In most cases, they aren't. And the second kind is what I call haters, and haters are just people who want to see you fail. They're the people who, the second that you start to get some notoriety, the second that you put yourself out there, they are, quick to be, visceral. And you see a lot of that online on social media because they don't have to say it to your face. And so some things that would never be said in a face to face get said openly and publicly. And to those people, I mean, I've always said I never met a hater doing better than me. The people who are doing better than me, they ain't got time for me. They're not looking down at me and throwing cheap shots. It's always some loser in his basement who's got nothing going for him and chooses to inject himself in somebody else's life and somebody else's business and somebody else's ideas in an attempt to kind of prop themselves up. And so when I encounter anyone, there's enough negativity on social media, and Twitter's gotten so bad that I'm just leaving Twitter at the end of this year. Not because anybody's necessarily being hateful to me, but because I just see it. It brings out the worst in me, and it brings out the worst in other people. But for the haters, man, for me, my band hammer is fast. I don't care. Like, I don't know you. You come out of the woodwork and say something nasty or do something that rubs me the wrong way. I don't need that in my life. And those people are nobodies to me, and they're nobodies to your audience too. And I would just, how many times have you gotten into a Twitter spat with some dude who has 3 followers and 10 tweets,
Yeah.
right? It's just, he's nothing, and he's not worth letting into your mind and giving space in your brain and your emotions for that kind of person. And so, yeah, I mean, if I blocked you without justification, I'll apologize, but I don't give it any credit anymore.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think you actually did the right thing, because I would have done exactly the same thing. It was an ambiguous situation where you could read it one way or the other, and it's like, I'm just some random. I mean, I'm not your family. I'm not anyone in your immediate life. There's no reason. It's like, if anything, I err on the side of I don't want to deal with this. When it comes to social media, because now, like, you kind of made the distinction between like family. Yes, I'm not saying you should cut family out of your life. Although I will say I'm not the kind that if you do have a family member, it's not like an immediate family member that you don't have to spend with. If they are a negative influence, I'm of the opinion that if you don't need to, don't. I mean, that's just my opinion.
If you don't have to spend time with somebody, why would you? It's like
Exactly.
negative friends. There's always friends who want you to stay who you always were and never want you to grow or improve. And the second that you get a little bit of motivation and a little bit of, a little bit of fire in you, you got a little bit of drive and ambition, there are going to be people in your lives who are there before you had that, and they don't want to see you have that, because now, as you say, oh, you're just doing it for the money. What an absurd statement for, like, I'm assuming your show is somewhat politically based and ideologically bent towards libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism, and for anybody in that vein to criticize you for trying to make as much money as you can on your own rather than having to rely on a boss or somebody to give you work to do, that person's a piece of shit. That person's just not even worth talking to.
Yeah.
They're a loser, and they're going to stay a loser until their mindset changes about money and about self-interest. And most importantly, the ideology teaches us to be self-sufficient men and women, to not to rely on government, to not to rely on a handouts, to do it on our own. and to provide for ourselves. And there's no purer form of that than going out and creating your own product or service and putting yourself out there and asking people to pay you if they get value out of it. And so anybody who comes at you with that kind of statement is, number one, they're hypocrites, and number two, they're definitely ain't doing as good as you, because they're
Yeah.
sitting around doing nothing, just criticizing you for the hard work you're putting in. So I just don't give those guys any
Oh, I don't
credibility
care.
at
Yeah.
all.
No, I just laugh at them or block them, or usually just block. But either it's usually some 150 follower account that has no influence. It's no one of substance is ever doing that. It is silly. It is just I do find it funny, but I mean whatever. I did see that you. I remember where I saw it. Actually, I think it was your episode, Dave. Recently, you were talking about how you were in the military during 9/11, and I thought it'd be an interesting topic for us to touch on just for a moment, because I kind of want to get your impression of your time in, because I actually just recently got out of active duty after 11 years. And my impression is it was fun. Well, in the earlier times, and the more rank I got, the less I enjoyed it, the more bureaucratic it became, and, that type of thing. I also thought it was interesting you were special force or spec ops. I don't know specifically what you were. I have initially joined for that and then failed. I mean, I'm not gonna say exactly. I don't want to dox myself. Plus, I don't want to go into like very specific details for listeners who don't really care of like the MOS and shit. But it was like one of those things. It's like sort of spec ops or not. It was like a high recidivism rate. And I remember I fell asleep during training, because it was like we were in a we were very sleep deprived as a group, and I didn't make it through that part, and it is what it is. And I ended up. It's funny. A lot of people think that when you fail, you're out. Like, no, how it works most cases, you're fail. All right, well, we're putting you in another job, and I ended up being a mechanic, and that's what I did for 11 years. And I mean, I enjoy working my hands, so I did enjoy that. Like I said, as I got higher ranking, I enjoyed it less. But I did kind of get your impression. I was also post 9/11, so I'm 30. To kind of put it in a scope for you, you were already in during 9/11. I was like 9 or some shit during 9/11. Sounds right, 10. I don't know. I'm not doing the math right, I think. But either way, I was very young, and so for me, I did join out of this like patriotic fervor. And when I was older, to some extent, it also was because I needed a job. But like there was that like deep well of patriotic pride that I did it. But you were already in. So and I guess I kind of want to just get. I mean, we don't have to go too long on that, because I am throwing a lot at you. But there's a lot to be said there, because it is interesting, because you joined before it even was this like impetus to join, if you will.
Well, I
So
think that
I'll give it to you. Go ahead.
I just think that emphasis, that sense of pride in America, and this sense of patriotism that existed long before 9/11, and
Yeah.
that was the reason that
Oh,
I
yeah,
joined.
you get what I mean, though. The
Yeah.
9/11 patriotic. Yeah,
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 it changed in 9/11, and a
yeah.
lot of that I didn't see because I was overseas during that time. I found out about it after I got home.
Mhm.
But I would very much classify myself as neoconservative, although at the time I didn't realize that's what I was. I joined because I really did believe that those who can should, and that was a noble thing to raise your hand and say, "Hey, if our nation is ever threatened, I'll be the one who stands and fights," because that's the way they preach it to you. And it wasn't until after I got out of the service and I started working in the private security field that I really realized that wasn't what we were doing, and I became really jaded with the whole thing, and that's when I decided that I wanted to do something different with my life rather than just, serve a government that I really didn't agree with, and an ideology that I no longer held. So, yeah, I joined in 1998, and I officially left the business, I guess, the business of war in 2009. So that was kind of my journey. Yeah, I was with the Force
Cool.
Reconnaissance Unit in the
Oh
Marines.
shit, you did the same as me. You were 11 years in. All right.
No, no,
Yeah,
no. I
that's
I did
oh
4
wait.
years in the Marines, and then I did another 5 in,
Okay. Yeah.
downrange, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
doing
Yeah. I got
security
you.
work.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I feel you. I get what you're saying. Because for me, it was a little bit weird walking away, because everyone I tell that I did that think I'm crazy, because I was 11 years in. I was over halfway to a pension. And it's just like 9 years is a long fucking time. And for one, I don't think it's going to be economic in the long run. I don't think it's smart. And it's also, I'm going to be miserable for those 9 years, because I just can't keep doing it. That's me personally. But
Well, I knew if
yeah.
I did 8, I'd do 20. So at the end of the 4, I said, well, if I go another 4, I'm going to be basically halfway to retirement, and I'll just stick it out. And I'd already done pretty much everything I could do in the Marine Corps. I started out in the infantry. I went to a sniper team, went from snipers to force reconnaissance. And after that, it's like, dude, there's no up from there. There's no other than increasing in rank and continuing to refine your skills. There really isn't any next level. Although if you just want to go to like, dev group or CAG, lat move over into the Army or the Navy, there really isn't much to do. And that's what my buddy did. My buddy stayed in, he went over to the Army, he joined, CAG and he finished out his career over there. So yeah, for me, the goal, I guess, the testing of myself, that was done. There was nothing else to prove. And so I decided to get out and try something else.
Yeah, that's exactly why because I know, like, my wife, to be honest, she's a little bit not as ideological as me, and so she did want me to keep going, and she was like, well, why don't you just like extend, or why don't you just do one more enlistment? It's like, and it's like when you're at that point of like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years, whatever, if you do another enlistment or another extension or whatever, it's like you are at that point where, like, the more time you put in, the more likely you're going to continue to put in, the easier it is to justify to keep doing it. And I mean, and there's truth to that. If you're at 18 years, it is kind of almost like, well, you're kind of dumb to not do the 2 years to some extent. I mean, you're leaving money on the table, but I couldn't do another 9. All right, let's shift gears. I was listening to your episode with Thaddeus Russell you had on, and you had a good little speech in the beginning of the intro about masks, and I thought you brought up a lot of good points, and you were kind of making the point that, like, if you got other shit going on, it's kind of not that big of a deal. And that's not to say that you are at all, I mean, I guess I'm interpreting your words, that you're at all okay with the fact they're making us wear masks in certain areas. But the same day, like, what are you going to do? Argue with someone at the airport? Like, I mean, make someone's life difficult. I mean, like, I'm the kind that I will push it where I can. Like, for example, there's a period of time, I'm here in Florida, there's a period of time where they did require it to go to get like the grocery store and stuff. And I usually wouldn't wear it until someone told me to. And most of the time, no one would tell me to. And when they did tell me, I wasn't rude. Just go, okay, all right, yeah. My bad. And so it wasn't like this negative, thing. And I kind of made them do it. It's a little bit different in the airport because they're going to make a thing of it. And I thought that was interesting, but I kind of wanted to apply that because I don't think I've heard you talk on vaccines, because I've been noticing amongst our people this fervor of the do not comply. And I've kind of gotten shit for this because I've said to some people that, like, well, that depends on your situation. Like, I mean, I think ideally you're a wealth, power, influence guy. I'm like more identify as an agorist. I think you should get to a situation to where you don't have to comply. But if you're in a situation where you're going to completely fuck yourself over, and if you can't handle it, you're not going to put foot on the table, X, Y, Z, whatever the thing is, you, for whatever your individual factors are, decide that you cannot handle that sacrifice. I actually think you're kind of silly to not comply. I mean, and that depends on the individual. If you're a single guy who has no debt, I mean, like, sure, it's not that hard to take a sacrifice or whatever, but it depends on the individual. So I kind of want to get your input because I did see a lot of parallels between that and the mass discussion you were having. And obviously, ideally, you're in a situation where you have all the wealth, power, influence in the world, and you don't have to ever comply to anything. But that's not the real world. There are situations in where, I mean, even if you have a lot of wealth, power, influence, you may have to comply to certain things here and there. So, and I also find this to be almost as a religious fervor that I don't find to be good, because if you want people to have this don't comply movement, I actually think it's better to have understanding and realize some people can't. And that way you're not like shaming people, because people are going to act their incentives one way or the other, and they're just not going to tell you about it. That's not going to be the only difference, is kind of my thought in the matter. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm not in favor of any sort of mandates that tell
Yeah.
somebody they have to put something in their body
Oh,
that they
no.
don't want to. Certainly not. I also don't think it's my position to tell somebody what they should do with their own body. If you look at it and you think that the risks are lower if you get vaccinated versus not, then I'm all for it. I mean, it's not. I don't support or not support any decision that somebody makes with their own body. It's not my place. I do think that there are a lot of people who now are facing issues where they have to wear masks where they don't want to, and it's a pain in the butt, and that where they're now forced to get vaccines or they may be forced to get vaccinated because of their economic situation, their work situation. And to that I would say, You may be in a place where you don't have any good choices, right? If you're facing bankruptcy, you don't have a lot of good choices on whether or not what debts you're going to have to pay and what you're not. It's and how much you're going to have to pay. It's and how much of your assets you're going to lose. That's up to a judge, right? Well, same thing's true when the mask mandates hit in California and they were making you wear that stuff everywhere, even outdoors on the streets. I got really sick of it. And so I left California and moved to Arizona where there's no mandates. You walk around without a mask all day. When I don't have to worry about not getting vaccinated because I work for myself and I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do. And the message that I've been preaching for years is try and get yourself as much as you can into that situation. And barring that, if you're like, oh, don't comply, let's rally, let's rise up against our government. Okay, go ahead and do that. I don't have to do that, and it's because I've put myself in a position where I don't have to. But in terms of wearing masks, and like the point I was making on the podcast was, look, I got too much other stuff going on. Like, what good does it do for me to walk around and be angry every time I put my mask on, to have hate and just visceral anger, which is what I see from a lot of people every time. Seems like every time I get on a plane now, somebody's complaining about having to wear a mask and they're getting thrown off the plane. And it sours the mood of a society. And I just choose not to live that way. I'm not going to live with that kind of hate and anger. You want me to put on a mask? Fine. I got to get to where I'm going because I got important work to do there, and I'll do it. Right. And everybody's got to make that personal choice for themselves. I do agree with everybody when I think that the propaganda and the mandates and the vaccine mandates and all that stuff is terrible. I agree with that. What are you going to do about it? If the answer is let's all stage a rally and a protest, that doesn't work. Oh, let's get the right people elected. Okay, I'm not relying on you to make sure that we all get the right people elected. I'll rely on me, and I'll work my own situation out to the point that I don't have to worry about these things anymore.
Yeah, 100% agree. I guess I actually haven't even. I guess we haven't even defined what wealth, power, and influence is at this point. And I guess now would be a good time because I did kind of want to make a. I feel like I was one of the first people who kind of pointed. Maybe you did at some point, but I know I pointed this out, and the few other like people in our space is kind of like, oh yeah, wow. And I noticed, and I'm sure you probably have noticed this already, that the wealth, power, and influence concept. I mean, I feel like there needs to be like a different term because it's like calling like almost like because like agorist, you're an agorist or agorism, but it's a little clunky saying wealth, power, and influence all the time. But uh, anyways, it is almost agorism, but with a different aesthetic and slightly different focuses. Is kind of the feeling I get out of it, and I actually like that because while I do consider myself an agorist, I do have critiques, and I think there are definitely benefits to the wealth, power, influence concept that I find kind of make up where agorism's lacking. I feel like agorism has a tendency to attract the wrong kind of people, and obviously, like a concept really can't entirely be determined by the people who are its not users, but it definitely has an influence, and it fucks with promotion or getting people to agree to it. But and I also do think agorism is a little bit overly focused on overthrowing the government in the end. And I do think in technically, theoretically, it would actually over time, but at the same time, that's not necessarily my concern. That's beyond my lifetime. All I'm necessarily concerned on is improving my station and my families and my communities and essentially circles emanating out from me essentially. So I guess we can start with defining wealth, power, and influence. I guess I kind of like to hear your thoughts too, how it relates to agorism, because I think they're very similar. And I know, I guess it's just an idea. It's kind of an unformed thought I have, but I like the interplay between the two of them, if that makes sense. So
Yeah. WPI, willpower emphasis, is based on a very simple philosophy or idea that the greatest amount of happiness, the greatest amount of freedom comes when we have the most amount of control over our lives and primarily our time. So the more time we get to spend doing what we want, when we want, with who we want, where we want, for as long as we want, without consideration of the cost, the more of that time we own, the freer we are and the happier we are. And so then the question becomes, what is the most direct line? What is the quickest way to maximize one's control over their own time and their own lives. And to me, it is controlling increasing your power, your power to act, your power to make decisions, increasing your wealth, which to me is defined by that freedom itself and the money that you make and the income you earn in order to create that, and your influence. So your ability to control your world around you, your environment. You can control others. And so that's the principle of it. Now, how that coincides with agorism, I have no idea. I won't even speak to that because, as you say, whatever sort of statement I would make about agorism, there'll be some idiot out there who wants to contradict me and say I don't really understand it. And so I understand what I believe. And so I'll speak to that and let everybody else figure out how they justify that in relationship to some other ideology.
Yeah, I just found that to be interesting. It's definitely something to be had there because I don't think I've heard anything from Wealth, Power, and Influence that necessarily conflicts with agorism at all. I don't know if it was you, for Matt Erickson, who essentially said something along the lines of like lobbyists, but even then I don't necessarily see. I don't even know if that would even be against agorism. I don't know. It's kind of a gray area. I found that to be almost. That's why I say it's kind of like agorism with a different aesthetic, a different focus. And I kind of like it for that reason. But yeah, I want to shift to talking about, I kind of want to talk on the Dave Smith discussion you had a while ago. And I kind of took some notes of some of the points that were brought up in the different things. And I kind of wanted to focus on them and kind of, go over them because I feel like, you've had a little bit of time since then. Maybe we can focus on some of these points a little bit more. First off, the first point you started off with was the idea of like their like the political approach that they were going for was kind of authoritarian. And I'll be honest, it came off a little clunky, but I think maybe you were getting at something that maybe was being misinterpreted. And so I kind of want to give you a chance to maybe address that again, or let me know if you completely stand by everything you said there. Because I think you were getting at something that might have just been misinterpreted. Because there was a lot of, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, there was some talking past each other there in that whole interaction. And that's not to ascribe bad will to anyone. I mean, that happens in a lot of discussions. People aren't picking up what people are setting down. And yeah, so.
Well, I mean, I believe that politics is inherently authoritarian.
Yes.
It is us saying we're now elected and now we get to decide what everybody else gets to do and what the laws are and whether we keep the laws or we get rid of the laws, whether we expand human liberty or we choose to keep it. And these are very, the idea of freedom and liberty in and of itself is a very complex idea. What does it mean? It means whatever somebody wants to say it means. We have our own definition of it, but if you go somewhere else, they may modify it according to their view of the world. Europeans are famous for this, right? So when I said that, what I said was you are claiming to be non-authoritarian and you're going to go to Washington and assume a role of an authoritarian. And I just think I understand why people would take offense to that. I just don't know how you are going to go and do that job and be in that role and not be exerting authority over others. Right now, to Dave's point, Dave's a great guy.
Yeah, I love
Dave's entire point
good.
is. Yeah, Dave's entire point is, we're not trying to win anything. We're just trying to spread the message, and we want to use a political process to spread a message. And Dave's been wildly successful. If he has the ability to form a coalition and a group of people and can use that as a pulpit to preach his message and his version of liberty and I guess what produces the best results for the most amount of people, then I don't fault him for that. What I fault and what I disagree with is anybody who tries to suggest that what you are doing politically, not the running for office and trying to message, because all that really means is I'm going to raise a bunch of money for a marketing budget so I can promote my message, right? And again, I don't care how you do that, but if you're going to suggest that you're actually going to affect any real political change because of your new movement, that I think is utterly ridiculous. And I submit to you the whole of history.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of how I interpret it as well, because I know how it was interpreted, and I always try my best to, whenever I listen to anyone, to interpret it in the most favorable way possible. I can see how some people would take it, but yeah, and you did touch on the spreading the message point, and you said multiple times, and I'm the same way. Like I said, I'm an agorist. I'm not a fan of political involvement in that way, and but so it is annoying. I hear it all the time. Is, oh, we're just trying to spread the message. We're trying to spread the message. It's like, well, I'm just like you, and I'm sure you'll agree. I don't have an issue with you spreading the message. It's the vehicle you're using, and that's kind of where. And I get the idea of that we get a boost, but at what cost? Like, what's the drawbacks? Like, there's a reason you're getting this boost, and I know they're like, well, people pay attention every 4 years or whatever, and that's true, but I do think there's some point to the quality versus quantity, and I actually think that I know a lot of people look at like agorism or wealth, power, and influence as being this like selfish ideologies that, and it is true, it is selfish, but I also think to some way it's actually better even for the message side of things
No,
because
it's self the message I have, and I won't speak to agorism, but the message that I have is self-interested, and that's
yes,
not the same as selfish. We do lots of things for self-interested reasons that are not selfish.
Mhm.
So, what you're doing and by pursuing kind of the path that I lay out is you're just simply doing what's best for you and your family. And in the process, if you're engaged in what would be considered moral or ethical activity as it relates to your business and your work, then you're helping other people. Because the fact is in a free society where people get to choose what they buy and who they invest with, that that means that the people who make the most amount of money in that world are the people who are providing the greatest amount of service or the people who are solving the biggest problems. That's where the greatest amount of money comes from. That's why school teachers don't make as much as somebody like me who creates an information products, because they're teaching someone else's kids general information, and what we focus on is specific information that has a financial component that's tangible that you can measure. And so, it's really a pretty simple economic argument that anybody who claims to be a philosopher in that ideology ought to understand. And just most of them are pseudo intellectuals.
Yes, it is funny. These are the same people that we were kind of talking about before, like the grifting or whatever. These are things that a lot of them do understand in one hand, but on the other hand, when it's advantageous, they do. And it's not even necessarily saying that they're doing it to be shifty. It's kind of this cognitive dissonance essentially, where it's like, well, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to make an argument for it. It's like, well, you're not really being that consistent here, are you? But the point of two I was getting, and you kind of laid out there in an economic sense, I actually do think the self-interested, type thing is actually what is better even on a messaging way. Like, yes, you may not get the most people, but it's kind of the quality versus quantity. I mean, a lot of people know, and this kind of work as a segue to my next point. It's well-known thing with like the Ron Paul movement. After it settled down, a lot of people just disappeared. And then I also think there's some argument to be had that like, okay, but some of the people that were created out of that movement, I mean, do we really want them? I mean, there are certain like Sarwarks or certain types that a lot of people know that aren't very good. If anything, it's like I forget who has the quotes. Like, there's nothing worse than like an idea not well defended or whatever. Someone will know. I think it was Bastia. I can't remember, but there is some truth to that. So it is this idea that when you do this and you get this huge boost and you get all these people who aren't really ready for the message and you send it out there might be something to that. I mean, I don't know, I'm just kind of conjecturing here, but the point I guess the next point I'm getting into is I kind of want to hear your idea on like the Ron Paul things. That's always anyone who has agorists or wealth, power, and influence. It's the first people always go to is like, well, what about Ron Paul? What about Ron Paul? What about Ron Paul? And I have my own arguments of why I love Ron Paul. This is not at all saying anything bad about Ron Paul. I think he's one of the best human beings there's been in like generations, and he's a great guy. But this isn't the silver bullet everyone thinks it is for people who are saying maybe politics isn't the way to go. And I want to hear your retort to anyone who would say Ron Paul, Ron Paul, Ron Paul.
Ron Paul as it relates to what? Because I'm not
Just
sure what you mean.
politics, because people use that. Because that is a common argument people use when you're saying that, hey, maybe politics isn't the way to go. They'll be like, well, what about Ron Paul? Like, look what
Well,
he
yeah,
did.
there
Look
was
at all the people
okay.
created.
there's a huge movement. This goes back to what I said earlier. Like if you're just using the pulpit to share a message, then I don't think it's any different than investing your own money and paying for marketing so that you can buy billboards or flyers to stick on people's cars at the grocery store. But if you want to look at what Ron Paul accomplished politically, there's very little. As soon as the movement died out, so to speak, as soon as he wasn't around anymore, the numbers fell back off. And then in 2016, when you had a great chance to kind of like people were actually looking at libertarian ideology, they put up one of the worst possible candidates, not necessarily the worst, but one of the worst possible candidates they could have. And since then, I mean, what do we get? What they get? 1% of the vote in the last election, and I mean, they'll be unlikely to do better next time around, no matter who runs. And so, again, my argument is just if you're spending time on politics, you're probably wasting your time. And here's the reason. Most people have very limited time resources. When you talk about the 40-hour work week and family and bills that got to get paid, and Susie's got, you got sleep and eating and, everything else that just has to get done in a day. There are very few hours that are actually free hours. And how do you want to spend those hours? Because the argument is like, well, why don't we do both? Why don't we do both? All right. If you just have flush on time, man, and you got nothing else to do, but bro, I don't know about you. I'm busy. And I value my time. I'm not going to put my time into anything that I cannot measure a return on, right? And what's the return? What's the measuring stick? The measuring stick is always for me is the same. How much increased time control did I generate through that activity? How much of my day do I spend doing the things that bring me joy and make me happy? And how much of it is devoted to somebody else and their prerogative and what they want to get done? And so if you want to do both, if you want to spend your very few hours of the day because it brings you great joy to be in politics, then I wouldn't stand in your way. But I think for the majority of people, their time is far better spent if they truly do want to increase their time and their control over their lives, would be far better spent doing anything other than advancing political ideology.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's literally my next point you got to, but I did want to touch on too. I thought it was a great analogy that you used in that, the dieting analogy. You essentially like you can, and you know what? I'm guilty of it because I've been someone who's been big into exercise my entire life. I've always liked to lift heavy, but I mean, I've had six packs a few times, and I've been ripped a few times. But I'm gonna be real. I just like to work out. I like to be strong, but so I'm very guilty of being the guy who doesn't do a lot of cardio, lifts heavy, and I don't know. I wouldn't say I eat like shit. As I've gone older, I clean it up a little bit, but there's been periods where I just eat like shit and lift heavy as hell. And you know what? I look big and juicy and I look great, but at the same time, it's like I could probably look better if I cleaned up my diet a little bit. And it is kind of fighting it. I think that was a great analogy to put it. And anyone who has any sort of understanding of it would get it. It's like, yeah, you can do both, but it's like, I mean, okay, you're not really maximizing your time. And especially if we're saying we're in this place where we're all freaking out. And I actually think there is truth. So there's a lot of tyranny on the horizon or here already. It's like, if it's go time, like you need to be, I think Vin Armani used the analogy of like, you need to get as close to the bullseye as you can. You need to be doing the best thing you can be doing. You don't need to be essentially fucking around. And I do think to some extent, politics are kind of fucking around. Like, cool. Like, what are we going to get out of it? And I guess that's kind of your point. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. It looked like your eyes lit up, but I was saying is that dying analogy was awesome.
No, I mean, I obviously I agree with you. I just think, I mean, and listen, I spent 6 years and built the biggest libertarian podcast on earth over that time. And I came to the realization that this was a waste of time and that this was not helping people. What it was making people angry. It was coalescing them around me. It was making me a lot of money. But it wasn't helping people improve their lives. And once I realized that, I immediately stopped doing it. I just said, so your audience knows, that podcast was generating upwards of $500,000 a year at the time in advertising revenue. And so when we decided, and other revenue that came in, so when we cut that back, we lost 3/4 of that revenue. And it sucks. That was a big haircut for most people. That's a career ender for them. But it was one of many things that I was doing. And more importantly is I followed my values. I didn't try and live a lie for the paycheck. I said, this is what I believe. This is what I think is I think things we've got right and the things we've got wrong. And we need to stop encouraging people to do things that are not going to benefit them in the short term or the long term. And so, and if anybody disagrees with me, you're free to. I'm just saying I have a pretty good track record of being right about stuff. And this is one that I'm more confident of now than when I first decided to quit the show, that it was the right decision. It was the right move to make.
Yeah. The next thing I want to hit on is another talking point that I heard, and I think Dave at one point said there are other things more important than wealth, power, and influence. And I think if you, especially as if you're an economist and you understand what wealth or money or value are representations of, they're just representations of value, then kind of know. But I guess I don't want to put words, because I mean, this is obviously a layup for you for what you want to say. I'm assuming you're going to agree that I actually kind of think there aren't things more important than wealth, power, and influence, because those, I mean, that it depends on what your values are. If you value, X, Y, and Z, then those are your things that you see as wealth, power, and influence. I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth because it depends on how you define words.
If you start with wealth, power, and influence as the starting point, then it would be very easy to say something like, well, family is more important than having those things. Having your health is more important than having those things. And I would agree with that. I would agree with being able to spend the maximum amount of time with your family, being able to have the greatest amount of health. I guess in your life, you want to have, you want to feel the best for the years that you have, right? You want to live the best years, not necessarily the longest years.
What I was getting at is I would define those as wealth.
I define it as control over your time, right? Yeah. So I want to spend as much time with my kids as I can. I want to be able to take them and show them the world. I want to be able to give them things that other people couldn't give. I don't work for money. I don't work for fame. I work because I love what I do, number one, and I work for time. And I get this. I'm a lucky person, not in part because I worked really hard, but I'm very lucky because I control a lot of my time. Even the time that I work doing things I enjoy doing. I don't work for somebody else. I don't work doing stuff, the drudgery. I'm not looking forward to retirement. I'm looking forward to the next stage of my growth of my life and how much more time I'm going to be able to control by the time I'm in my 60s. And so when looked at from that perspective, when you understand principally that wealth, power, and influence is about controlling your time and about greater freedom, well, now there is no more important thing than that. It's like, how do we get that? And the surest path to that is the one that I outlined.
Yeah. I think the one of the last points I'll probably finish out on is one thing that people commonly say is like, okay, I get it. Like, this is what you believe, but why are you attacking our specific, praxis or way of going about this? Why do you feel the need to attack us? And I guess I would like to hear your retort. I have obviously my answers, but I want to hear what you would say to that.
Well, I'm not attacking anybody.
Yeah, I know.
I'm challenging their viewpoint, and if they find that to be troublesome, and they want to get butthurt about it, that's all right. But here's the thing: part of it is because in looking at another way of that I think is wrong and pointing it out and bringing and shedding light on it, it also sheds light on my message. We're having this conversation right now because I was chastising somebody else's idea, and I was pointing out the flaws in that logic and why I thought that was a failed strategy and why I thought spreading a message like that does more harm than it does good. And that brought a lot of light to my message. Now, it brought out a lot of haters, but again, doesn't matter to me. I want you to hear. Now you talk about WPI, it's used as a hashtag on Twitter. Like, people know what it means when you come from that camp. And I have no camp, right? People believe in that as a principle, even though I have no movement around it. There's not the wealth, power, and influence group that we're all part of. I have my own community of people who are trying to live those values, but the message has gotten out, and now people now recognize it as an alternative to what they've been trying for the last 20 years or 30 years. And I think it will be beneficial as more and more people hear that message and start, again, become as disenfranchised with the current process as I've become.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time. I do, I do find it interesting though that like certain things. I mean, I guess to kind of touch on agorism a little bit again. I know agorism has had an insurgency, and so has your wealth, power, and influence concept. And I do think it's interesting that these have kind of had a uptick, and it makes sense. I think a lot of people are catching on to these concepts of maybe there are better things to do with my time than try to elect someone to do X, Y, and Z. And there are ways to make realistic changes in my life. I mean, on the other hand, you obviously have the insurgency, LPMC, and maybe that's a positive thing as well, because they're kind of rooting out the negative aspects of the LP, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm still unsure how I feel about it one way or the other, but I mean, I do find that to be an interesting development in these times, that these things are gaining ground. And, we see things like your Nomad Network, and then things like John Bush's Freedom Cells that are like really blowing up. Like people are looking for community outside of politics or what have you. And I find that to be a lot of people accuse our kind of being like black pill, not by our kind, me and you, people who don't believe in utilizing political solutions as being black pilled. I'm not black pilled. I'm optimistic. I think there's good change on the horizon, and I mean, with the good comes the bad. I think there's the bad as well. I guess it's a good way to finish it out. What are your thoughts in the future? I have a feeling you aren't black pilled as well. I mean, I know people will always accuse anyone who doesn't want to utilize a political system as being black pilled, because you just don't trust the way it's going. You just think we're going to shit. Like, that's not what I think, and I have a feeling you feel the same way.
No, I'm very optimistic about the future. I think it's going to be very messy as we come through this transition that we're in right now, because I think that the economy is going to change a lot over the next 20 years. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are hurt because they don't have the skills and they didn't see it coming, and they weren't prepared for it. And I think a big problem with that, a big problem with probably the circles that you run in, and I mean, no disrespect to them, is that you use terms like black pilled, white pilled, red pilled, purple pilled, aqua pilled,
kind of dumb,
right? It's like nobody knows what that means outside of your tiny little community of space. And when you're trying to communicate a message, sure, if you just want to talk to all these people who are nodding their head and who already understand, then great, fine. But the vast majority of people, the vast majority of Americans, like 99% of them, don't have any idea what you mean when you talk about those pills, and you talk about all agorism and all these other and all these other philosophies. And these guys sit around and they debate this stuff and the philosophical garbage, and they accomplish nothing. They feel better about themselves because they're using words that only they get, and so they feel superior. And they've read a couple of books and they understand, the principles of Rothbard and Hoppe and all these other guys. And it makes them feel better about themselves. And that's fine, but don't pretend like you're actually accomplishing anything. And I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm just saying in general to the people who think like that and talk like that. Understand you're repelling more people than you're bringing to your movement by speaking in tongues that nobody understands. See, everybody understands I want to control my own time. Everybody understands I want a little bit more money in my pocket, and I want to have a little bit more freedom in my life to do what I want to do. Everybody gets that. I don't have to come up with some catchy like pill formula for them to get that. And there should be more people in the circles that you run in who spend time really trying to clearly explain what it is that they believe in a way that anybody in an elevator could understand it in 60 seconds. And they need a better elevator pitch than what they got now.
Yeah, which I guess that kind of. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and I was going to say, and there are ones out there. Matt Kibbe came up with a great one. Anytime anybody asks me what I believe, fundamentally, I believe we shouldn't hurt people. We shouldn't take their stuff. Right? That's something everybody gets. You don't got to explain your philosophy and ideology to them. Do you agree with that? Yeah, I don't think we should hurt people, and I don't think we should steal from people. Great. We can be friends, right? There's no need to go into the debate on all the nuances of what that means, because it's the nuance where everybody gets frustrated and everybody gets angry. Because what does it really mean to not take somebody's stuff? What does it really mean to not hurt somebody? And what about this? Can we not yell fire in a theater? Is that aggressing against somebody? There's all kinds of this little nuanced garbage that nobody in America, except this tiny little fraction of society, spends any time thinking about. You know what they are thinking about? They're thinking about what kind of life they want to have. They're thinking about what they want their kids to, what kind of lifestyle their kids will grow up in, what kind of schools they get to go to, right? They're thinking about Saturday night and the football game. They're thinking about the vacation that they're going to take. Those are the things that occupy their time. Those are the things that are important, because those are the things that matter. Those are the moments that we don't get back. Time's a non-renewable, non-replenishable resource, right? You waste it, you squander it on garbage that doesn't matter and accomplish nothing in the process. I have disdain for someone who doesn't value their time, because they don't value themselves. And so that's the last statement I'd make about that, is just, man, guys, what are you doing? What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with those very few moments that you get left on this earth? Most of that time is just being squandered, and it makes me sad.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you did touch on a little bit, is kind of maybe something I was trying to put into words, is one of the many reasons why I kind of like, I mean, I do think there are pros and cons of both when it comes to like the agorism, wealth, power, and influence, but it is essentially an more easily explainable version of agorism. And that makes sense. That is super accessible to the layman, whereas agorism is very deep, big brain, Austrian economic type, all these catchphrase words. Whereas something wealth, power, and influence is just, hey, don't you want to make your life a little bit better? And that's kind of how I've tried to do my best of expressing agorism. I don't come at it from some sort of, deep-seated moral, strong, like whatever. It's just like, hey, these are ways you can make money, improve your station in life. And that's the same thing with wealth, power, and influence. And I think, and I do think wealth, power, and influence does a better job of being more accessible to the layman. And I guess I'll commend you on that, since you're essentially the one who kind of coined it. So, yeah, I do appreciate you coming on. If you got anything else to say, you can say it, but I guess you can go ahead and do plugs.
No, I'm good. Yeah, you can go to jasonstapleton.com, and Wealth, Power, and Influence is the podcast, if you want to go give it a listen and see if it's for you or not. And Nomad Network is my.nomadnetwork.app, and you can check that, or go to the App Store and just type in Nomad Network, and you can pull up the app there. It's free to join, doesn't cost you anything. And yeah, we got about 2,000 people in there now, and growing steadily. So yeah, we'll see what next year brings. Who knows?
Yeah, hell yeah. No, I'm definitely, I need to get into that. It's something that really interests me, the Nomad one. As I said before, there's the John Bush's Freedom Cells as well, but it seems to be yours is much more focused on entrepreneurship, whereas John Bush is more a community. And both are valuable, but I think both have their place. Me, as for anyone's watching, you should know, this is No Way Jose Show. This you can watch me on YouTube, on all the major audio podcatchers, Odyssey. If you want to follow me on Twitter at 2020 No Way Jose, patreon.com just No Way Jose 2020. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And with that, we are out. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks.